before its time. And again, these temples here, this is just like one of dozens of them that are spread out over a large area. And people who go there today can spend an entire day just touring these ancient ruins of the temples. And they were dedicated to Buddha and Hindu gods. So you can kind of see like there's like a face etched in there. Like all throughout the temples, there's these inscriptions and these like monuments to the Hindu gods and to Buddha. Which brings me to the question of religion. For most of its history in the early times, it was a Hinduism was a state religion. Like I said, being influenced from India, Hinduism was a state religion until the 13th century. The king decided, for political reasons, to change the state religion to Buddhism. So the entire country converted to Theravada Buddhism, which is like the Buddhism that they practice in Thailand. And then they also moved the state capital to Phnom Penh, which is where it is today. So it was in 1450 they moved the capital. And it's more central in the country. Just one other thing about religion, and I may touch on this later, but so the state religion is Buddhism, but if you actually go out into the country and talk to regular people, especially people in the rural areas, there's a very, very heavy influence of animism, which is, if you aren't familiar with what that is, it's kind of a religion or a worldview where they see everything in terms of the spiritual world. There are good spirits and there are evil spirits, and their whole daily life is wrapped up in trying to appease the good spirits and keep the evil spirits away. So they will try to earn merit by offering things at the temple. And so like the average Cambodian I would talk to doesn't really know all of the tenets of Buddhism. Even though it's a Buddhist country, it's very much a mix of Buddhism and animism if you talk to the average person. This is one of the temples. So then there was a period of French colonization, which came about because there were like centuries of conflict between Thailand and Vietnam and Cambodia over land. And actually, even to this day, there are political tensions over whose land is whose. And it came to a point in, let's see, what year was this? 1863, that it was actually, like Cambodia was at risk of being swallowed up by Thailand. And the king asked France to protect the country. So it entered under a French protectorate, which very quickly, even though the king probably didn't anticipate it, very quickly turned into a full-fledged colonization. And France colonized Cambodia for 90 years.
Wow.
They became independent in 1953. And the French colonization actually was a little bit less harsh than maybe in Vietnam. The French let the Khmer, or the Cambodian elites, kind of have a lot of freedom and really do their own thing. And they kind of let the people live their daily lives. And they did a lot of good things for the country. They developed infrastructure. So even the roads in the city were pretty much all put in by the French. A lot of architecture and building. And they even were involved in helping to preserve some of the cultural artifacts. Like they sent scholars up to Angkor Wat to research the temples there and try to preserve some of the temples and some of their religious monuments. So there were some good things that came out of that French colonization. But even today you'll see a lot of influence of that. Up until maybe 5 or 10 years ago, everybody learned French in school. All of their law documents were written in French, so to study law or anything like that, you had to learn to read French. If you wanted to be a doctor, you had to learn to read French. But it's changing. It's more moving towards English. So after the French colonization, there was a short period of peace and prosperity until the Vietnam War, which affected Cambodia a little bit. There were, periods where the Vietnamese or the U.S. soldiers, or the Vietnamese soldiers were crossing the border into Cambodia to hide, and then they were bombed a little bit by the U.S. because of that. So after the Vietnam, right around this time, the Khmer Rouge happened, which may be something you've heard of. A lot of people, like if I talk to the average person, they don't really know about this period of history. It's not always taught in U.S. history class or in history classes in U.S. schools. So sometimes I talk to people and they're very surprised to know that this happened. It was a civil war in Cambodia that was really one of the more sad genocides that's happened in modern history. So it was led by a man named Pol Pot, who was a Cambodian man. So it was Cambodian versus Cambodian. And he and a group of other wealthier Cambodians who had the opportunity to study outside of the country, they were educated in France, and they came back from France with a lot of ideas about communism, and they had this idea that they wanted to create a utopian society of peasant farmers. So they came back, and in 1975, they overtook the country. Most Cambodian people didn't really know what was going on at the time. They weren't as connected as we are today with news and quick technology. So it kind of just happened, and people didn't really even realize it was going on until it was full-fledged happening. And the outside world wasn't very aware of what was going on at the time because it was very much kind of kept undercover. And the king of Cambodia at the time was kind of used as a, I don't know what the word is, almost like a puppet. So he would go to the news and say everything's fine in Cambodia, everything's fine in Cambodia, because he was being threatened. So that kind of made it so that people outside of Cambodia didn't really know that there was this war going on at the time of when it was happening. So because they wanted to create an agricultural society, they wanted this equality where everyone was just farmers. The targets of the regime were all the elite, educated, or professionals. So anybody who was a teacher or a doctor or a lawyer or any kind of political power or connection, or if you were just wealthy, you were a target of the regime. Even down to the fact that if you wore glasses, that was associated with wealth and education. So the targets of the regime were brought in for interrogations, which usually ended up, they were either executed or they were put into work camps. But pretty much anybody who fit into the wealthy or educated category were executed. The rest of the Cambodian people were either forced into work camps or they fled the country. So people who lived closer to the border of Thailand, a lot of them were able to flee the border and ended up in refugee camps in Thailand. And actually to this day, if you were to meet a Cambodian in the United States, there's a pretty good chance they're going to be in their 50s or 60s, and they probably were a refugee of the Khmer Rouge because a lot of them came from that time. So they were lucky if they were able to escape. Other people were put into work camps, and they separated families on purpose to keep control and to let it be kind of a fear-based thing. So a husband and a wife would be put into separate provinces, and they would be allowed to see each other once a month or something like that. But that was the way they controlled the people, by fear. So if you don't know where your children are or where your wife is, you're going to be much less likely to run away or rebel because you're scared they're going to do something to your family. So that's really how they control the people. And it lasted for 4 years. They don't really know how many people died. It was at least 1.2 million.
Wow.
I've seen some people estimating it was up to 3 million because there are so many that were not recorded. So many, they didn't have records like we do today and back then.
Wow.
But basically everyone in the country was affected, and even to this day, if you meet somebody who's older, who lived during that time, they're all affected by it. In the early 2000s, there was a statistic I heard that was something like half the country was under the age of 15.
Wow.
So it's a little bit, now it's probably half the country is under 25 or 30 or something like that. But so that just really affects the entire country. So then the aftermath of that, in 1979, Vietnam invaded and established a 10-year-long protectorate. I read someone had written that when the Khmer Rouge came into the country, that 2,000 years of history had come to an end. And what they meant by that was that when they came in, they just intentionally destroyed so much of the culture and the tradition. It was, no religion, no arts, and everyone who had knowledge and skills that could be used to train the next generation were either killed or left the country. So it just set the nation back in so many ways, like in education or medical care, even the arts. So there's very, very little film industry or music in the country because at the time, all the people who were experts in that were targets of the regime. So the nation really has been trying to rebuild ever since.
Wow.
Just one example, so I was a teacher at a university. It was a government university in Cambodia. And, they don't have real textbooks. So the country, all their libraries were burned down. So just even something as simple as that, a group from an outside country came in and built a library in the university for the students. And they'd never seen anything like a library. So just something as simple as that. And this university I worked at has probably a few hundred teachers. But after the war, there were only 6 people who worked at that school who survived the regime. So just imagine how that can affect education as a whole and that tradition that they had been building. I like to say that I think that if Cambodia had not had the Khmer Rouge, it would be a lot like Thailand today. If you look at Bangkok, it's a much more developed city. They have much better infrastructure, and I think that the Khmer Rouge just set Cambodia back so far that that's why it's really still struggling and developing. After that, in 1991, the United Nations came in to kind of protect the country and sort of help establish a democratic process. There were free general elections in 1993. It was the first general elections. By 1999, Cambodia joined ASEAN, which is kind of like an association. It's association of Southeast Asian nations, and it kind of establishes free travel or work or education across the countries. So it was really the first time in centuries that Cambodia moved away from being an isolated country into the world scene. So for today, I'll talk a little bit about the culture and lifestyle today. The language of Cambodia, it's called Khmer, or the way they pronounce it is Khmer, Khmer. And it is originated from Sanskrit, an ancient Indian language, but it's its own writing, and it's completely its own language. It's really only spoken in Cambodia. It has the longest alphabet in the world. I don't remember the exact numbers, but there's something like 25 consonants and 33 vowels or something like that. And it's very difficult to learn. But it's also a phonetic language, so unlike Chinese or Japanese, where they learn characters for words, Cambodian is phonetic. So once you learn all those consonants and vowels, you can put words together. And it's also not a tonal language, whereas Lao and Vietnam and Thai, those languages are tonal. So it's a little harder in that sense to learn those languages because if you say something but you say higher or lower, it's a different meaning. So it's very hard for Westerners like us to learn languages that are tonal because we don't have that at all in English. So it's really embarrassing for people who are learning. I know people who are learning languages that were tonal, and it was just so hard because they think they're saying something, but because the tone was off just a tiny bit, it was something else. And I already talked a little bit about the religion, but it's very infused into the everyday life. So I think the last statistic I read was 98% of the country is Buddhist. And again, when I say Buddhist, it's really a mix of Buddhism and animism. So each town or village centers around a wat or pagoda, which is this here is kind of the back of one. And there are monks who live there, and the people will always celebrate their holidays and festivals by going to the wat or the pagoda, and just everything kind of centers around that religion. Food. So every meal is eaten with rice 3 times a day. At my house, we have rice 3 times a day. I don't always eat it, but we always have it in the house. So a lot of stir-fry dishes, some curries. Khmer curry is a lot sweeter than like Thai curry or Indian curry that's very spicy. Khmer curry has a very strong coconut milk base and it's sweeter. And they eat a lot of vegetables because they have access to fresh vegetables and fruit. So in a way, their diet is kind of healthy, not necessarily because they choose to be healthy, but just because that's what they have access to. So they don't have a lot of meat. They'll put a little bit of meat in a stir fry or a soup, but because there's so much poverty, they don't have a lot of meat. If they had more money, they probably would eat a lot of meat and be unhealthy. But because the fruit and vegetables are so cheap and easy to access, or people grow them themselves, they eat a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables. My favorite is mangoes. They're unlike any mango you can get in a grocery store here. And when it's mango season, you can get tons and tons of mangoes for like almost nothing. They're so good and so sweet. So yeah, that's the food. They use a lot of spices like lemongrass and ginger, similar to what they use in Thai food. Family is a really big value, and the fabric of society is really tied up into the family life. So your family is like more important than anything, really, if you're a Cambodian. And to shame or embarrass or dishonor your family is probably one of the greatest sins that you can commit. So they are very, very much about respecting and honoring their family. Sometimes almost to the point that it hurts them, you know, so they have to honor and respect the family so much. But it's really neat to see because, like, even in extended families, they live together usually. So it's very different than here. When you get married, you often move in with your in-laws and you live together, and that's just expected. And grandparents usually are a really, really big part of raising the grandchildren. So the parents will often be working, and the grandparents will spend a lot of the time raising the grandchildren. And there's no government provision for the elderly, and there's really no such thing as retirement savings. So they're completely dependent on their children to take care of them when they're old. And so the young people really take that seriously. It's an expectation that they're raised with. It really struck me when I had freshmen in college and I asked them to write, like, what is your 5-year plan or goal? And I had like a couple hundred students at that time, and probably 90% of them included something in their 5-year plan about how they wanted to get a good job after graduating and then help support their family. And so just the fact that it was such a widespread belief is very, very different to me. And it just showed me how important family is to them and how they depend upon each other. Holidays and celebrations are a really big part of the culture there. This is actually a picture from my wedding. My husband is the one with the pink flowers in the middle. So we had kind of a mixed Cambodian and American wedding. But this is a picture from one of the parts of the wedding where they, it's kind of like called a fruit walk. And in the morning of the first day, they have like a 3-day wedding. We didn't do 3 days, but normally it's like multiple days. And this part of the wedding, they get all of the groom's family, guests, friends, and they meet at the groom's house, and they carry all this fruit, and they have a procession to the bride's house, and then there's someone who's mediating kind of a symbolic conversation between the parents of the groom and the parents of the bride to make sure everybody is in agreement that this wedding is going to take place. So our wedding didn't follow everything exactly, but we did do that, and it wasn't from his house to my house because my house was in America. But it was kind of fun to be able to experience that. And other big holidays they have are Khmer New Year, which happens every year in April, and the whole city shuts down and everyone goes to the villages during Khmer New Year. It's kind of like Chinese New Year, but they celebrate it in April. I don't remember why it's different, but even their birthdays are around that. So like we turn another year older on the exact date we're born. They turn a year older on Khmer New Year. It doesn't matter which day you were born. So it was kind of funny when I first was dating my husband and he didn't know what his birthday was, and we were like looking through the family books and records, and we finally figured it out. He knew that he was born on a Sunday, and it was the year of the tiger. That was what was important. Everyone knows what day they were born and what the year was, but very different. I don't know what day I was born on. I just know it was, what date it was. Another big celebration is called Puchum Bun celebration. It's kind of like a Day of the Dead. It's when they honor their ancestors who passed and gone before them. And they believe at this time, it happens around in October or September each year, they believe that the spirits of people who are dead and who haven't been reborn or gone to heaven yet come back to kind of like haunt the earth for 15 days. And so during that 15-day period, everyone has to go back to their hometown and go to the temple and give offerings to the monks. And it's kind of like to appease these spirits who didn't get to be reborn yet, so that they don't, come back and haunt you. So that's another big, example of how the religion is very much weaved into their celebrations. So a couple of modern day issues. This is just kind of from my perspective. So one modern day issue is globalization. So Cambodia has become more and more connected with what's going on outside of Cambodia and in the world. And even being as a teacher there with students, like I was an example of globalization because I was there teaching my students my language and they were learning about American culture from me. And the youth are becoming much more westernized. So there's good things about that and there's bad things about that. One of the bad things is it kind of has created a challenging relationship between the young people and the older generations because they don't understand each other. The youth want to be more and more like the West. They want to dress like Westerners. They watch the movies and music that we do. They don't want to marry someone their parents choose for them. Just all of these things that are really changing, and that's affecting family demographics. So yeah, another thing, the good things about globalization are kind of obvious, like it's helped the economy, it's helping education, and people in Cambodia are getting more and more opportunities to go and study or work in other countries. And development is related to that. So the country's developed a lot, like obviously after the Khmer Rouge, it was just basically like wiped out and they had to start over with a lot of things. If you went to Cambodia like 10 years ago, Phnom Penh would look like a different city, which I went to Cambodia 10 years ago, and when I went back this summer, it was just crazy how fast things are developing, like skyscrapers just going up overnight. They recently got Burger King and Starbucks. I had a friend that said, she always said that once Phnom Penh gets a Starbucks and a McDonald's, she's leaving. She's moving to the village. There still is not a McDonald's, but there is a Starbucks. So yeah, the development, again, has pros and cons. Like there's a lot of good things happening because it's helping the economy, but it's creating other issues. Like one is flooding. So the city wasn't designed to hold a lot of traffic and a lot of cars and a lot of people. And again, it was like the infrastructure was developed by the French and the roads weren't made to have a lot of traffic. And they weren't made to really have a lot of space to build extra lanes. So it's kind of, like reached a point where everyone's coming to Phnom Penh because that's the only place that they can get a good education. It's the only place they can really find a good job. But there's all these people coming there and the city's not really able to handle it. So the government will take a lake and fill it up and build apartments on top of it. So it causes flooding when there's a rainy season because that's really their climate is like hot season is dry, and then cool season is rainy. And they have monsoon rains for like 3, 4, 5 months every day. And so there's not really a developed sewer system, like a place for the water to go. And then when they're filling in all these natural bodies of water, it's creating this standstill of water every time it rains, which is really a big problem.
Wow.
And another related to that is traffic in the city. So like I said, the roads weren't designed for a lot of cars. So if you went 10 years ago, you would see like 95% of everyone on the road would be on motos. But now you see more and more cars as the country's developed and people have more money, they're buying cars, but the roads can't handle all the cars, and so there's really bad traffic and also traffic accidents. And then the last thing, did it just fall in?
Yep.
Yeah, the last thing is political tensions are kind of an issue today. And I don't want to go too much into this or I could be here a long time. But basically, ever since they had the first general elections, the same guy has been in power, the same prime minister has been in power ever since then. So, in a lot of people's view, the government is very corrupt. And recently, the last several years or so, as the youth have become more and more westernized, the opposition party has grown in its strength and in its popularity. So there are more and more Cambodians who want to see a new regime in power, and they do have elections. So the current government is becoming kind of fearful that they're going to lose their place in power. Even just this last summer, they kicked out the free press. Like there was one newspaper there that really reported, the only newspaper that would report anything negative about the government was just kicked out of Cambodia. And the current government is kind of becoming very strict on NGOs and foreigners who are in the country because they're associated with the opposition party. So that's an issue because there's an election coming up next year. And so it's kind of causing a lot of just tension across the country, especially because there's such a growing population of younger people that are standing up and joining the opposition party. So, that's all I have to share. I put a couple of resources here if you were curious to learn more. There's a book by David Chandler. He's a very well-known person in regards to Cambodian history. The Killing Fields is a book that was written a long time ago, but it writes about the Khmer Rouge. And then this book that I really like called Killing Fields, Living Fields, Faith in Cambodia. It documents stories of people who lived through the Khmer Rouge and were Christians, because the church has always been a very, very small population of Cambodia, but it tells about how people in the Christian church persevered through that time, because again, they were targets of the regime because they were religious. And then there's a very famous memoir called First They Killed My Father, A Daughter of Cambodia Remembers. And it's by a Cambodian girl who lived through the Khmer Rouge, and it's her story. And it was recently made into a movie on Netflix by Angelina Jolie. I don't know if you guys know much about her, but she adopted a child from Cambodia and is a very big activist in Cambodia. So she went and filmed a movie in Cambodia just the last year or so, and it just came out on Netflix the 15th of September. I haven't watched it yet. But I did see the trailer, and it looks very, very well made and very respectful and honoring of those people who went through that. But it is probably a little violent and sad, so I'll just say that because I haven't seen it. But it looked like it would be a good movie if you really wanted to see more about what the Khmer Rouge was like. So, yeah, do I have time to take a few questions?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Just probably more of a comment than a question. We were over in Cambodia about 5-6 years ago, and I absolutely fell in love with the country. But what amazed me was what they have gone through over the life of the nation. I mean, they were attacked by Thailand, they were attacked by Vietnam, they were attacked by Laos. Something I didn't know, there are more bombs dropped by the United States in Cambodia than there were during the Second World War. The Khmer Rouge, a lot of that has been swept under the carpet, and the horrific things that took place during their few-year reign. But after all of that said and done, the people were wonderful. they were happy, or they seemed happy. Maybe we just
Yeah.
were set off to a happy region.
They're very resilient people. I think that's a big theme.
Very
Very
resilient.
resilient. And I did read some online survey somewhere by one of those travel guides that they like surveyed the most hospitable people in the world, and Cambodia won that.
Yes.
I'm sure it wasn't like a really official survey, but I was not surprised because the people are just very warm and friendly
Yeah.
and open. Yeah.
It amazed me.
If I remember correctly, is his name Pol Pot?
Pol Pot,
yeah.
He was allowed to live. He was never punished for killing that many people.
Yeah, they like didn't have a very organized trial or anything after the Khmer Rouge. He lived until old age and died in his 90s. And actually, after the Khmer Rouge ended, there was still a lot of unrest, and there were still pockets of the Khmer Rouge in the provinces. So it officially ended, but yeah, like he lived till old age, which was kind of, unfair. But there were people who were involved in the Khmer Rouge that are in the current government now, if that tells you anything. So yeah.
Did you find your life filled with some anxiety and a little fear over there, or was it pretty comfortable for you?
I was not very much filled with fear. I did get robbed when I first got there, and I was riding my bicycle and I got my purse snatched. So like theft is a really big thing in the city, but I never felt like anyone was trying to hurt me. Just trying to take advantage of like, oh, I can get something easy. Look at that, she just had her purse right there. So I never felt very nervous. I will say that going back to visit this summer and bringing my daughter made me a lot more nervous. And I kind of like, man, I can't believe I did some of the things I did when I lived here before. But yeah, the traffic is probably one of the things I was most worried about. Because I did drive a moto around and I was comfortable with it, but I know that like traffic accidents are pretty bad there. Yeah.
Are your husband's relatives still there, or?
Yes, all of his family lives there.
Still there.
His parents are still living. They lived through the Khmer Rouge. So his mom has told him a lot of her experiences. And it's interesting, she actually was from a wealthy family in Phnom Penh, but somehow made it. Her family was killed, but she had already gotten married at the time and lived in the province with her husband, my husband's dad, and I guess was able to just kind of stay under the radar. And they escaped death a few times, but he doesn't have any living grandparents. So, yeah.
Does your sister go back a lot?
She came back when I lived there. She came back with my family to visit. She was only 5 months old when she was adopted, so she doesn't speak the language or anything, but it was really good for her to go and see where she was from. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes.
This has nothing to do with anything except 6 degrees of separation. My daughter teaches in San Jose, and Christopher Hudson's son was in her journalism class.
Oh, okay.
The Killing Fields.
Yeah. Cool.